How to Speak English Like a Native, My Personal Journey. Hello, friends. Welcome to English Mastery Hub. I'm Logan, and today I will share my story with you. Have you ever wanted to speak English like a native speaker? Imagine speaking with confidence. Imagine understanding every word. That was my dream, too. When I started learning English, it was hard. I made many mistakes, but I did not give up. I practiced every day. I listened to English songs. I watched English movies. I also spoke to my friends in English. Now I feel happy. I can speak English easily. I can understand people. I feel like English is my second language. Today, I will tell you how I did it. I will also give you tips to help you. So, sit down, relax, and let's start. The beginning of my journey. I grew up in Paris, a city filled with beautiful buildings, delicious food, and of course the French language. French was all around me, and it was the language I used every day. It was part of who I was. French was my comfort zone, my identity. But as I got older, I started to feel like something was missing. I began to realize that I wanted more. I wanted to speak another language, especially English. I loved listening to English music and watching Hollywood movies. I loved the way native speakers sounded. They spoke with such ease, humor, and emotion. They expressed themselves effortlessly. I admired that, and I wanted to do the same. I wanted to speak English like them. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how difficult it seemed. English felt like a faraway mountain, beautiful but hard to reach. I knew some basic words and phrases like hello and how are you, but speaking English fluently, that felt impossible. It seemed so hard to say everything I wanted to say without mistakes. Even though I loved English, I felt like I was stuck at the bottom of a mountain, looking up. I wasn't sure how to start climbing or where to begin, but deep down, I knew I had to try. I realized that if I wanted to speak like a native, I would need to put in the effort. I knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but I was determined to try. I wanted to speak English with confidence, just like the people I admired in movies and songs. It was the beginning of my journey to learn English. It was a challenge, but I was ready to take the first step. I wasn't sure how far I would go, but I knew I had to start somewhere. Why I decided to learn English. One day, something happened that changed my life. I was at a small cafe in Paris. I was enjoying my coffee and relaxing. Suddenly, a group of tourists came in. They were speaking English. They were smiling, laughing, and asking each other questions about Paris. They looked very happy and excited. They talked about their plans to visit different places. I could hear their English words, but I didn't understand everything they said. Then, one of the tourists turned to me. He smiled and said, "Excuse me, could you recommend a good place to visit nearby?" I froze. My heart started to beat fast. I wanted to help him. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't find the right words. My mind went blank. I tried to speak, but only a few broken words came out. I said, Eiffel Tower, near. My voice was soft, and I felt nervous. The tourist smiled politely and said, "Thank you." Then he turned back to his group, and they walked away. That moment stayed with me. I kept thinking about it for days. I felt embarrassed, but more than that, I felt sad. I thought to myself, Logan, you live in Paris. Paris is a city where people from all over the world come to visit. Many of them speak English. Why can't you talk to them? I realized something very important. If I could speak English fluently, I could talk to people from other countries. I could help tourists. I could make new friends. I also thought about my future. I knew that speaking English could give me more opportunities. I could travel to English-speaking countries. I could watch movies and listen to songs without subtitles. I could even find better jobs. That day, I made a decision. I told myself, I will learn English. I will speak it fluently one day. But I also knew that learning a language takes time. It is not easy. I needed to work hard and stay patient. The first step I took was to write down my goal. My goal was simple: speak English confidently. I put this goal on a piece of paper and kept it on my desk. Every day I looked at it and felt motivated. The second step was to create a plan. I decided to study English for 30 minutes every day. I told myself, it doesn't matter if I make mistakes. The most important thing is to try. I started with small things. I learned new words like tourist, visit, and recommend. I practiced saying these words aloud. I also practiced simple sentences like, the Eiffel Tower is near here. I said these sentences many times until I felt confident. Every day I tried to learn something new. Some days I learned a new word. Other days I practiced listening to English songs. I also watched English videos with subtitles. At first it was hard. I didn't understand everything. Sometimes I felt like giving up. But I remembered the moment in the cafe. I didn't want to feel embarrassed again. I kept going. Slowly, I started to see progress. I could understand more words. I could say simple sentences without fear. One day, I saw another group of tourists at the same cafe. This time, I was ready. When they asked me for help, I smiled and said, "You can visit the Louvre Museum. It is very beautiful." The tourist smiled back and said, "Thank you." That moment made me feel so proud. I realized that learning English was worth it. Now I enjoy learning English every day. It has become a part of my life. I know I still have more to learn, but I am excited about the journey. If you are thinking about learning English, remember this. Start small. Practice every day. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You can do it, just like I did. That moment in the cafe taught me something important. Learning a new language opens doors to new opportunities. It helps you connect with people and understand their stories. This is why I decided to learn English. It was one of the best decisions of my life. When I decided to learn English, I knew it would take time. I understood that I couldn't learn English overnight. But I also knew one important thing. If I had clear goals, I could make progress step by step. So I sat down and thought about what I wanted to achieve. I asked myself, what are the most important things to focus on? After some thinking, I set 3 simple goals. 1. Improve my pronunciation. I wanted to sound natural when I spoke English. My goal was to speak clearly so people could understand me. I admired how native speakers sounded. Their words flowed smoothly, and their pronunciation was so clear. To improve my pronunciation, I listened carefully to how native speakers talked. I watched English videos and paid attention to how they said each word. I also practiced speaking aloud. I would repeat words and sentences many times. For example, if I heard someone say, "How are you today?" I would pause the video and say it myself. I tried to copy their tone and pronunciation. At first it was hard. Some sounds in English were very different from French. But I didn't give up. I practiced a little every day. Slowly, I started to notice that my pronunciation was getting better. 2. Expand my vocabulary. I realized that to speak English well, I needed to know more words. Words are like building blocks. The more words you know, the more you can say. So my second goal was to learn new words every day. I started with simple and common words like food, water, and friend. I wrote these words in a small notebook. Next to each word, I wrote its meaning in French. I also wrote an example sentence to help me remember how to use the word. For example, word, friend. Meaning, ami. Example, I have a good friend. I also used flashcards. On one side of the card, I wrote the English word. On the other side, I wrote the meaning. I carried these cards with me and reviewed them whenever I had free time. Learning vocabulary wasn't just about memorizing words. I also tried to use the new words in sentences. For example, if I learned the word beautiful, I would say, the sky is beautiful today. Watching English movies and listening to songs helped me too. If I heard a word I didn't know, I wrote it down. Later, I looked it up in a dictionary. This way, I learned words that people use in real life. 3. Practice daily. I knew that the key to learning English was practice. It wasn't enough to study once in a while. I needed to be consistent. So, I made a promise to myself, practice English every day. Even if I only had 10 minutes, I would use that time to improve. Some days, I practiced speaking. I talked to myself in English about my day. For example, I said, I woke up. I ate breakfast. I went to the park. Other days I practiced writing. I wrote short sentences or simple stories. This helped me think in English. Listening was another important part of my practice. I listened to podcasts, songs, and videos in English. Even if I didn't understand everything, I kept listening. Over time, my ears got used to the sounds of English. I also set reminders on my phone. The reminders said things like, practice speaking or learn new words. These small reminders helped me stay consistent. Why goals helped me. Having clear goals made learning English easier. I always knew what to focus on. When I felt stuck, I looked at my goals and reminded myself why I started. Every time I improved a little, I felt proud. I celebrated small wins, like saying a word correctly or understanding a sentence in a movie. These small victories motivated me to keep going. What you can do. If you want to learn English, try setting simple goals. Start with 3 goals, just like I did. For example, improve your pronunciation. Learn 5 new words every day. Practice speaking for 10 minutes. Write your goals on paper and keep them where you can see them. This will remind you to keep working hard. Remember, learning English is a journey. It takes time, but with clear goals and daily practice, you can make great progress. One day, you will look back and feel proud of how far you've come. These 3 goals helped me a lot. I hope they can help you too. Step 1. Listening like a native. The first step in my English journey was listening. I knew that to speak like a native, I had to listen like a native. So I decided to surround myself with English every day. I started by watching movies and TV shows in English, but I didn't just watch for fun. I watched with a purpose. I chose shows with clear and simple conversations. My goal was to understand how native speakers talked. One of my favorite shows was Friends. The characters spoke like real people, using everyday words and phrases. Their jokes and funny moments made it easier to remember what they said. When I watched, I didn't just sit and relax. I paused the video when I heard a new word or phrase. I repeated the lines aloud, trying to copy their accents and tone. Sometimes I even wrote down the phrases I didn't understand. Later, I looked up their meanings. At first it was hard. There were many words I didn't know, but I told myself, it's okay. Just keep listening. I focused on the rhythm of their speech and how they used their voices. I also started listening to podcasts and audiobooks. I chose topics I enjoyed, like travel and personal stories. In the beginning, I couldn't catch every word, but I didn't let that stop me. I realized that understanding everything wasn't necessary. What mattered was getting used to the sounds of English. Over time, I began to notice patterns. I heard the same words and phrases again and again. For example, I often heard the phrase, "what's up," in movies and shows. At first, I didn't understand it, but after hearing it many times, I learned that it means, "How are you?" or "What's going on?" Listening became a daily habit. I listened while walking, cooking, or even relaxing. The more I listened, the more comfortable I felt with English. One day I noticed something exciting. When I watched Friends, I understood more than before. I could laugh at their jokes and even guess what they were going to say next. That moment made me feel proud. If you want to improve your English, I recommend starting with listening. Choose shows, movies, or podcasts that interest you. Don't worry if you don't understand everything. Just listen and enjoy the process. Remember, listening is the first step to speaking like a native. Keep going, and you will see progress. Step 2. Speaking without fear. Here's something important. You cannot learn to speak English fluently without actually speaking. This step was hard for me at first. I was shy, and I felt nervous. I asked myself, what if I make mistakes? What if people laugh at me? These questions made me afraid to speak. But then, I realized something very important. Mistakes are normal. They are part of learning. Every time I said a word wrong, I had a chance to learn the correct way. Instead of feeling bad about mistakes, I started to see them as steps forward. To improve, I joined a language exchange group in Paris. These groups were amazing. I met people who wanted to practice languages too. Some were native English speakers. They were patient and kind. When I made mistakes, they didn't laugh. They helped me. Speaking with native speakers felt scary at first. My words didn't always come out right, but they understood me. They encouraged me to keep talking. Little by little, I felt more confident. When I couldn't join the group, I practiced speaking alone. This helped me a lot. I stood in front of a mirror and had pretend conversations. I talked to my reflection like I was talking to a friend. I would say things like, "Good morning. Today is sunny. I'm going to the park." Or I'd pretend to answer a question like, "What is your favorite food?" "My favorite food is pizza." Talking to myself might sound funny, but it worked. It helped me get used to hearing my voice in English. It also gave me more confidence to speak with other people. Another thing I did was describe my surroundings in English. For example, if I was in my room, I'd say, "This is my bed, it is soft. I have a blue blanket." If I was outside, I'd say, "I see trees. The leaves are green. The sky is blue." I also tried giving short speeches to myself. For example, I would pretend I was explaining something to an audience. I'd say, "Hello everyone. Today, I will talk about my favorite hobby. I like painting because it is fun and relaxing." At first, my sentences were simple, but as I practiced, I added more details. For example, instead of saying, "I like painting," I said, "I like painting because it makes me feel calm. I paint flowers and landscapes." Speaking every day became a habit. I set small goals, like speaking for 5 minutes in English. Some days, I spoke longer. Other days, I only spoke a little. The important thing was to practice regularly. I also recorded my voice. This was very helpful. I listened to the recordings and noticed my mistakes. I worked on improving them. Sometimes I didn't have anyone to practice with, so I used technology. I talked to voice assistants like Siri or Alexa in English. I also used language apps that had speaking exercises. These tools gave me more opportunities to practice. Over time, I stopped worrying about making mistakes. I realized that people care more about what I am saying than how perfect my English is. My goal was to communicate, not to be perfect. The more I spoke, the easier it became. I noticed that words came to me faster. I didn't have to think so hard about grammar or vocabulary. Speaking started to feel natural. One day, I had a conversation with a tourist in Paris. They asked me for directions in English. I answered them confidently. It wasn't perfect, but they understood me. That moment made me very happy. It showed me that all my practice was working. If you want to speak English fluently, don't let fear stop you. Speak as much as you can, even if you are alone. Practice every day. Remember, mistakes are your best teachers. Speaking without fear is one of the most important steps to learning English. You can do it. Step 3. Mastering. Pronunciation. Pronunciation was one of the hardest parts of learning English for me. Many English sounds were so different from the sounds in my native language, French. At first, it felt impossible to pronounce some words correctly, but I didn't give up. I started by focusing on the sounds that were tricky for me. For example, the th sound in words like think and the was very difficult. In French, we don't have this sound. My tongue didn't know what to do. To improve, I practiced a lot. I learned that, for the th sound, I needed to place my tongue gently between my teeth. Then, I had to blow air softly while saying the word. It felt strange at first, but with time, it became easier. One thing that helped me a lot was tongue twisters. Tongue twisters are short sentences with many difficult sounds. For example, I practiced saying, "The 33 thieves thought that they thrilled the throne." It was hard, but it was also fun. I said tongue twisters slowly at first. Then, as I got better, I tried to say them faster. This helped my mouth and tongue get used to English sounds. Another tip I used was listening to native speakers and copying them. I found videos, podcasts, and songs where people spoke clearly. I listened carefully to how they pronounced each word. Then, I repeated the words aloud, trying to match their pronunciation. I also used online tools to help me. There are many apps and websites where you can compare your pronunciation with native speakers. For example, I would say a word into the microphone, and the app would show me if I was saying it correctly. It was like having my own personal English coach. One day, I found a fun exercise online. It was a recording of a native speaker saying a sentence. I had to listen carefully and then repeat it exactly the same way. The app told me if I was close or if I needed more practice. This exercise helped me a lot. I also recorded my voice. This was very useful. When I played back the recordings, I could hear my mistakes. Sometimes, I realized I was saying a word wrong without knowing it. By listening to myself, I could fix those mistakes. Practicing with friends also helped. I asked my English-speaking friends to correct me when I said something wrong. They were very kind and helpful. They taught me small tricks to make my pronunciation better. For example, I used to say the word walk like walke. My friend explained that the L in walk is silent, so now I say it like walk. These small corrections made a big difference. Singing songs in English was another fun way to improve. I chose songs I liked and sang along with the singer. At first, I couldn't match their pronunciation perfectly, but I kept trying. Singing made me feel confident and happy while practicing English. I also practiced linking words. In English, native speakers often connect words when they speak. For example, instead of saying, I want to eat, they might say, I want to eat. I practiced these connections to make my speech sound more natural. One day I had a proud moment. I was talking to a tourist in Paris, and they said, Your English sounds so good. I was so happy. It showed me that my hard work was paying off. If you want to improve your pronunciation, here are some tips. 1. Focus on tricky sounds. Practice them slowly until they feel natural. 2. Use tongue twisters to make your speech clearer. 3. Listen to native speakers and try to copy how they say words. 4. Use online tools to check your pronunciation. 5. Record your voice and listen to it. Fix your mistakes. 6. Practice with friends or language partners. Remember, mastering pronunciation takes time and effort. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every mistake is a step closer to sounding like a native speaker. Keep practicing, and you'll see progress. Step 4. Learning everyday expressions. When I started learning English, I noticed something interesting. Native speakers didn't always speak the way textbooks taught. They used casual words, slang, and phrases that were not formal. If I wanted to sound natural, I needed to learn these everyday expressions. One big difference was how people expressed feelings. For example, instead of saying, I am very tired, native speakers often say, I'm exhausted. Or instead of, I am very happy, they might say, I'm thrilled. Learning these phrases made my English sound more natural. I started paying attention to how people spoke in movies, TV shows, and conversations. Whenever I heard a new expression, I wrote it down in a notebook. My notebook became my expression book. It was full of useful phrases like, what's up? A casual way to say, how are you? I'm starving. A way to say, I'm very hungry. No worries. A way to say, it's okay or don't worry about it. I practiced these phrases by making sentences. For example, If I learned I'm starving, I would say, I'm starving after a long day at work. This helped me remember how to use the phrase in real life. Another thing I learned was idioms. Idioms are short phrases with meanings that are not obvious. For example, it's raining cats and dogs. This means it's raining heavily. Break a leg. This means good luck. At first, idioms were confusing. I didn't understand why people said break a leg when they meant good luck. But as I practiced, I started to understand and enjoy them. I also learned slang. Slang is informal language that people use in casual conversations. For example, cool means something is good or interesting. Hang out means to spend time with someone. Bummer means something is disappointing. Slang helped me sound more like a native speaker. One of the best ways I learned everyday expressions was by talking to native speakers. I joined language exchange groups and made friends who spoke English. They used casual phrases naturally, and I picked them up by listening and asking questions. For example, I once asked, "What does 'let's call it a day' mean?" My friend explained that it means to stop working or doing something for the day. After that, I started using the phrase, and it became part of my vocabulary. Watching TV shows and movies also helped. Shows like Friends and The Office are full of everyday expressions. I would pause the show, write down a new phrase, and practice saying it. Sometimes, I even tried to imitate the way the actors spoke. Reading books and articles written in casual English helped too. I read blogs, magazines, and even social media posts. These were great places to find real-life expressions that people use every day. I also practiced using these phrases in my own conversations. For example, if someone asked me how I was, instead of saying, "I am fine," I would say, "I'm doing great, thanks." Using casual phrases made me feel more confident. One day, I had a conversation with a tourist in Paris. They asked me, "How's it going?" At first, I didn't know how to reply, but then I remembered my practice and said, "It's going well, thanks. How about you?" They smiled and said, "You sound just like a native speaker." That made me so happy. If you want to learn everyday expressions, here are some tips. 1. Listen carefully. Pay attention to how native speakers talk in movies, TV shows, and real life. 2. Keep a notebook. Write down new phrases, idioms, and slang you hear. 3. Practice. Use these phrases in sentences and conversations. 4. Ask questions. If you don't understand an expression, ask someone or look it up. 5. Watch and read. Choose materials with casual, conversational language. 6. Speak with friends. Practice talking with people who use English every day. Learning everyday expressions takes time, but it's worth it. These phrases make your English sound more natural and help you connect with people better. Keep practicing, and you'll be speaking like a native in no time. Step 5. Building confidence through practice. When I started learning English, I was nervous about speaking. I worried about making mistakes or sounding silly. But I realized something important. Confidence comes from practice. The more I practiced, the better I became, and the more confident I felt. I made it a habit to speak English every day. At first, I started small. I would practice with myself at home. I talked to myself about my day, described what I saw around me, or repeated phrases I learned. This was a safe way to build confidence because no one was there to judge me. One day, I decided to try speaking English outside. I went to a cafe in Paris where tourists often visited. If I heard someone speaking English, I smiled and started a small conversation. I might say, "Hello, where are you from?" or "Do you like Paris?" These were simple questions, but they gave me a chance to practice. Sometimes the conversations were short. Other times the tourists asked me questions about the city. I didn't always know the perfect words, but I tried my best. And guess what? Most people were kind and patient. They appreciated my effort to speak their language. I also joined English-speaking groups. These were groups of people who wanted to practice English together. We met in parks, libraries, or coffee shops. Sometimes we played games or talked about interesting topics. It was fun, and I learned a lot from these meetings. One of the most helpful things I did was to set small challenges for myself. For example, 1. Ordering in English. I went to restaurants where I could order food in English. I practiced saying things like, "I'd like a coffee, please," or "Can I have a sandwich?" 2. Asking for directions. I pretended to be lost and asked for directions in English. This helped me practice listening and speaking. 3. Talking to myself. Every morning, I spent 5 minutes speaking English. I talked about my plans for the day or what I dreamed about the night before. I also used online tools to practice. There are many apps and websites where you can talk to native speakers or other learners. I made friends from different countries and we practiced English together. Making mistakes was part of the process. At first, I felt embarrassed when I said something wrong, but then I realized that every mistake was a lesson. If I said a word incorrectly, someone would correct me, and I would remember it for next time. One day I had a long conversation with a tourist who asked me about Paris. We talked about food, art, and history. At the end, they said, "Your English is really good." That moment gave me so much confidence. Here are some tips to build confidence through practice. 1. Start small. Begin with short sentences or simple conversations. 2. Talk to yourself. Practice speaking at home when you're alone. 3. Join groups. Find people who want to practice English with you. 4. Use online tools. Talk to native speakers or other learners online. 5. Be patient. Don't worry about mistakes. Learn from them and keep going. 6. Celebrate progress. Every conversation, no matter how small, is a success. Confidence doesn't come in a day, but with practice, it grows stronger. Speak English whenever you can. Talk to friends, tourists, or even strangers. The more you practice, the more confident you'll feel. Soon, speaking English will feel natural. The turning point. One day, something amazing happened that made me realize how much I had learned. It was a beautiful morning in Paris, and I was guiding a group of English-speaking tourists around the city. I had never imagined I would be in this position, but here I was, talking to a group of people from different countries in English. We started by talking about the history of Paris. I told them about famous places like the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame, and the Louvre. I explained how Paris became one of the most beautiful cities in the world. As I spoke, I noticed that I wasn't nervous at all. I was speaking clearly, and the tourists were listening to me with interest. Then, we shared some jokes. The tourists laughed, and I laughed with them. We talked about fun things like our favorite books, movies, and even food. It felt so natural to speak English with them. At that moment, I realized something very important. I wasn't just speaking English. I was living it. Before this experience, I had always felt a little nervous when speaking English. I would worry about making mistakes or not knowing the right words. But on that day, everything changed. I wasn't thinking about grammar rules or vocabulary. I was just having a conversation like it was the most normal thing in the world. It was a huge turning point for me. I knew that I had reached a new level in my English learning. I had moved from being afraid of making mistakes to being confident enough to speak with others and even lead a tour. What made this moment so special was that I could feel the difference in myself. I had been practicing for months, working on my pronunciation, listening to English, and speaking every day. All of that hard work had paid off. I realized that learning a language isn't just about memorizing words or grammar rules. It's about connecting with others and sharing experiences. English had become more than just a language for me. It had become a tool to explore the world and communicate with people from all over the globe. This moment made me feel proud of how far I had come. I had started as someone who was afraid to speak English, but now I was guiding others through the streets of Paris in English. I felt like I had achieved something important. I also understood that learning a language is a journey. There will always be new words to learn and new things to practice. But the most important thing is to keep going and never give up. Every small step forward is a victory. Here are some lessons I learned from this turning point. 1. Practice makes a difference. All the time I spent practicing English paid off. The more I practiced, the more confident I became. 2. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Mistakes are part of the learning process. They help you improve. 3. Language is about connection. It's not just about speaking correctly, but about connecting with people and sharing experiences. 4. Believe in yourself. If I can do it, you can too. Keep practicing and believe that you will get better every day. That day, guiding the tourists in Paris was a moment I will never forget. It showed me how far I had come in my English learning journey, and it reminded me that the most important part of learning a language is enjoying the process and living the language every day. Lessons learned. Looking back on my journey, I've learned many important lessons about how to speak English like a native. These lessons helped me improve and build my confidence. Here are the most important ones. 1. Immersion is key. One of the most powerful things I did was to surround myself with English every day. Immersion means putting yourself in an environment where you hear and use English all the time. I watched English movies, listened to podcasts, and spoke with English speakers as often as I could. The more I exposed myself to English, the faster I improved. So, if you want to learn, try to hear and use English as much as possible. 2. Don't fear mistakes. At first, I was very afraid of making mistakes. I thought I would sound silly or people would laugh at me, but I quickly realized that mistakes are a part of learning. Every time I made a mistake, I learned something new. It's important to remember that nobody speaks perfectly all the time. Mistakes help you grow, so don't be afraid of them. 3. Practice. every day. One of the most important lessons I've learned is that practice is key. Even small efforts every day can make a big difference. I didn't try to learn everything in one day. I took it step by step, practicing a little bit every day. Whether it was listening to English, speaking with someone, or learning new words, every practice session helped me get closer to my goal. So make sure you practice every day, even if it's just for a few minutes. 4. Focus on pronunciation. Pronunciation was a big challenge for me. The sounds in English are sometimes very different from those in my native language, but I learned that clear pronunciation is very important. If people can't understand you, it can be hard to communicate. So I spent time focusing on how to pronounce words correctly. I practiced with tongue twisters, listened to native speakers, and used online tools to check my pronunciation. Clear speech made a big difference in how confident I felt and how well I was understood. 5. Use real-life language textbooks are helpful, but they don't always teach you how people speak in real life. Native speakers don't always use formal language. They use slang, idioms, and casual phrases. I wanted to sound natural, so I paid attention to how native speakers talked in movies, TV shows, and podcasts. For example, instead of saying, "I am very tired," they might say, "I'm exhausted." Learning real-life expressions helped me sound more like a native speaker. So don't just learn textbook English. Learn how people actually speak in everyday situations. These lessons helped me improve my English and become more confident. Learning a language is not easy, but if you follow these steps, you can make progress. Don't give up, and remember that every step forward is a step toward your goal. Keep practicing and enjoy the journey. If you are learning English, remember this: fluency takes time, but it is worth it. Learning English has opened many doors for me. It has helped me meet people from all over the world, learn about new cultures, and grow as a person. So, keep practicing, stay curious, and never give up. You are closer to your goal than you think. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who might find it helpful. Until next time, keep learning, and remember, every word you learn is a step closer to fluency. See you in the next video.